I want you to imagine this.
You go to bed, exhausted from an entire day working from home. You're so tired that you didn't even think twice about the position you're sleeping in. All that matters to you right now is sleep.
You wake up the next day, refreshed from a good night's sleep. You're sitting up to stretch when suddenly, you're in pain! Specifically, your neck is in pain.
You can barely move your head because of how much it hurts. You try and massage your neck to alleviate the pain, but it only gets worse. Finally, you resort to spending the whole day trying your best not to move your head.
Well, it's times like these that we take our head and neck movement for granted, which is exactly what I'll be helping you with today. The topic for this episode is the head and neck's ranges of motion and the bones and muscles involved. After this video, maybe the next time you wake up with a stiff neck, you'll be able to recognize just how important our head and neck's range of motions are in your daily life. Now, you may already have an inkling of what ROM is, but to put it simply, range of motion, or ROM, is the measured beginning and terminal angles, as well as the total degrees of motion transversed by a joint moved by active muscle contraction or by passive movement. It is the joint's movements from anatomical position to a particular direction with its extreme limit and can be measured by degrees. In short, it's the full movement potential of a joint. To give an example, the ROM for flexion at the elbow is the difference between the angle of the elbow in its anatomical position and the angle of the elbow in its maximum flexion. Since we're on the topic of motion, let's not forget the major organs involved in our bodily movement, our bones and muscles. The bones work together with muscles to maintain body position and to produce controlled, precise movements, specifically a certain range of motions. For the movement in the head and neck area, the main bones involved are the clavicles, the mandible, the cervical vertebrae, and the base of the skull. The fixed part of one side of a movable joint is what we call the origin, while the more movable end is the insertion. The insertion is pulled towards its origin whenever the muscle contracts.
I know we're getting a little too technical here, but what may sound to be difficult to understand is actually very easy to put into practice. In fact, you're probably demonstrating one of these ROMs at this very moment. Well, unless you're in an anatomical position while watching, which would be very weird. Let's get back to our poor friend from the start of the video and help him relieve of his pain in the neck with the help of range of motions.
The first is flexion. In the head and neck region, it is the movement of lowering down the chin towards the chest. The joints involved in this range of movement, particularly with the lateral flexion of the neck, are the scalenus medius muscle and the scalenus anterior muscle. Scalenus medius muscle's origin is the transverse processes of the lower 6 cervical vertebrae, and its insertions is the upper surface of the first rib, while the transverse processes of typical cervical vertebrae are the origins for scalenus anterior muscle. Scalene tubercle of the first rib is its insertion. Next, extension is observed when we move parts at a joint so that the angle between them increases and the parts move farther apart. The muscle that extends the neck is called the trapezius muscle. Its origin is from the medial third of superior nuchal line, external occipital protuberance, ligamentum nuchae, 7th cervical spine, and all the thoracic spine, while the lateral third of the clavicle, acromion process, and spine of scapula are its insertions. Other than the trapezius muscle, splenius capitis muscle has something to do with the extension of the neck. Its origins are the lower part of ligamentum nuchae and the upper 4 thoracic spines. The cervical spine is very flexible. Sometimes flexibility can make the neck vulnerable to injury. The tipping of the head backward with the face towards the ceiling is what we call hyperextension. And the opposite of this is the hyperflexion. The origins of SCM is the upper border of manubrium sterni and the medial third of the upper surface of the clavicle, while its insertions are the mastoid process behind the ear and the lateral third of superior nuchal line. Rotation in the neck or body is a twisting movement produced by the summation of the small rotational movements available between adjacent vertebrae. It is when we turn the head left and right where the nose moves over the shoulder as the head rotates. We can do this by turning the head as far as possible in a circular motion. The SCM and the trapezius muscles are involved as well with the rotation of the head and the face to the opposite side. Abduction, or lateral flexion, is a movement away from the midline. It occurs whenever we try to place the ear upon the shoulder through a sideways movement of the neck, directing the ear toward the shoulder tip on both sides.
Adduction is simply a movement toward the midline.
Circumduction is not a joint action, but a series of 4 joint actions performed in a sequence. It is the combination of the previous ROMs that I have mentioned, the flexion, the extension, abduction, and adduction. And besides the ROMs found at the head and neck, here are a few other ROMs found in the other parts of our body. Dorsiflexion refers to the flexion at the ankles so that the foot points more superiorly. The movements which occur at the ankle joint, referring to the rotation of the foot along its long axis, are called inversion and eversion. Inversion involves the movement of the sole towards the medial plane so that the sole faces in a medial direction. Eversion involves the movement of the sole away from the medial plane so that the sole faces in a lateral direction. Supination and pronation are movements of the radius around the ulna. In supination, the forearm moves laterally, wherein the palm faces anteriorly. Meanwhile, pronation is where your forearm moves medially and your palm faces posterior. And lastly, opposition is the thumb movement that brings the tip of the thumb in contact with the tip of a finger. We've covered almost all the possible ranges of motion found in our body. But before we end this video, I would just like to go over and highlight the key things we've learned today, such as the definition of range of motion, what is origin and insertion, the different ROMs involved in our head and neck, the muscles and bones associated with them, and the other ROMs the body can do. However, even as intricate and impressive one person is, this show would not have been possible without the help of many marvelous minds working together. With that being said, I would like to give credit where credit is due and thank Abby, our awesome editor, for putting all of this together, Tina for her fantastic illustrations and her help in the demonstration, and Malcolm for his remarkable acting, and lastly, our team of creative writers who helped plan and script the show, Christine, Jaleen, Malcolm, and yours truly, Avi, your host. Thank you guys for watching, and tune in next time for more interesting facts about the human body. And remember, if you don't use it, you lose it. See you later.